Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, GCP, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
Ryan,
and Peter.
Episode 196, recorded for January 18th, 2023. The Cloud Pod plays with all the stuff it found in the clean room. Good evening, Ryan. It's just the two of us.
Yeah. Hello. How's it going?
It's been a week. It's a long week of, review time season and writing reviews and thinking about people's performance. And it's really tiring. And when you have a large team, you do a lot of calibration, a lot of aligning on vision and things. And so, I'm ready for the weekend.
Indeed.
But I'm ready for the weekend on Mondays typically. So, it's not that strange. Well, unfortunately, Peter couldn't make it tonight, and Jonathan also had something going on, so he wasn't able to make it. So we said, let's just do the two of us. So this will either be a lightning round version of Cloud Pod in like 15 minutes, or we'll talk for hours, because Ryan and I have been known to do that over a pint many a time. So you'll see how it goes, listeners. All right. Well, I have a few news stories that I thought were worthy of talking about. It's sort of nice now to be in the new format and now get to be like more, have more prejudice against stories now. So like earlier we were talking about a story potentially for contact center AI, and I was like, I don't really care about this. And Ryan was like, I don't care about this either. And I was like, dead. It's gone. Yeah. But normally we would have had to talk about that, and we would have tried to make it interesting, and it wouldn't have worked, and people would have tuned us out. But now we can talk about things that we actually think are interesting or cool, which is sort of fun. But if you are interested in all those boring stories like contact center AI, you can find all those in the show notes in the bottom. AWS Systems Manager announces patching policies which enable cross-account and cross-region patching. And all I can say is thank you. Because the idea of having to just set up patching policies and try to track patching across multiple accounts in my 175 accounts was kind of miserable, and I didn't want to do it. And it's one of the many reasons, other than the fact that it's part of Systems Manager, which I sort of have a hatred for. I did not want to set that up. So the patch policy provides you a user experience in the single console to easily identify and enforce patch compliance across accounts and regions in a few clicks. And with this, you can essentially define all of your organization's policies and centrally manage them. So you can hand that off to a SOC team or a L1 team or anybody who's in charge of patching that isn't me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a huge advantage to those centralized teams trying to support just the growing cloud workload. And as we've segregated to very granular levels and having multiple accounts, it gets really difficult. And I'm sure there's lots of automation to make this easier. People have got their homegrown scripts and all kinds of things to try to push this across accounts and across regions, but nothing beats having it native in the product. So nice. I like this one.
Me too. And Google has a patch policy, but it doesn't work on-prem. And I'm like, wait, but I could use this one. I can use it on Google and I can use it on-prem. There's options. There's definitely options. All right. Well, if you are in Perth, Australia, which is on the the western side of Australia, I think I look at a map, right? Western side. You now have a data center option from AWS in the form of a local zone. And then there's also now one in Santiago, Chile. So if you need that particular item, you now have it. Now, of course, the one problem with the Perth region is that it's parented by the Sydney region. So if the Sydney region gets taken out in a tsunami or any other disaster, you can't actually control anything in Perth. But it's a good attempt in the right direction, and maybe this will force them to finally build something for real on the other side of the country, which would be really great for DR, because the current regions are just too darn close for some DR policies and their needs. And then the Santiago region, which I thought would have been, parented to something in South America, is parented to North Virginia for some reason, which I don't fully understand. But here we are.
I have to imagine that there's, just a lot of the availability concerns that Amazon works with for a region. Like they just couldn't do, like a number of network circuits, and maybe power and power generation is a concern. And the other thing too is I always think of South America as being kind of west, but it's very far east from at least where we are in California. So, I mean, I'm sure that all these things come and play a part.
I'm sure they do. And then Clean Rooms, which were announced at reInvent, have officially entered preview, which means that they're not just vaporware. It's not just slideware. It actually exists. You have to sign up for it through the website if you're interested in getting access to it. But the Clean Room is a new analytics service that helps customers collaborate with their partners to more easily and securely analyze their collective data sets without sharing or revealing underlying raw data. Instead of spending weeks or months developing clean room solutions, customers can use AWS Clean Rooms to create their own clean rooms in minutes and collaborate with any company on the AWS cloud to generate unique insights about advertising campaigns, investment decisions, and research and development. One of the most interesting things, of course, now being in preview, is there's actually pricing. And the pricing for this is priced at a clean room processing unit, which is basically 63 cents per CRPU hour. And they gave an example on the pricing page. Worked out to, relatively like 3 queries a day over a month time, basically works out to be like $197 or something, not too crazy. So I'm sure you can make that much, much worse with bad queries and bad optimization. But, in their Happy Path example, it's only $193.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, this is a very interesting model, right? Like for a long time, customers would, grant cross-account access at the S3 bucket level and, sort of figure out all the permissions you need to do with like Redshift or another Amazon tool. So it is sort of interesting to see sort of the way that this is presented to the end users. Kind of curious to play around and just see if it's, is it just like logging into any kind of other, Jupyter Notebooks environment, or is it, a little fancier?
Yeah. It's interesting to me that, this is very targeted at the advertising and marketing vertical. And I don't fully understand that, because it seems like it's much more powerful than that and can do a lot of different things. This is just a really common use case in marketing, maybe because you have a bunch of different data sources that you need to bring together to dig analysis for your type of insights. I don't really know. I just think it's a little bit interesting.
Yeah, I thought that verbiage was crazy. And I guess it sort of makes sense if you want to do targeted advertising and you have all your customer data and your usage data, where you'd want to be able to provide the ability for an outside firm, to sort of run reports and analytics on that data set without exposing that customer information, which I'm pretty sure is what this. So, I mean, I get the use case, but it caught me a little bit by surprise, because I hadn't really thought of that being.
It wouldn't have been the use case that I would have thought they would have built this for.
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought this was a different use case for science or R&D type stuff that then marketing people then they could use too. Like that's how I would have thought it. But clearly they have a customer who is very interested in this type of technology, or a set of customers in this particular space, and so that's why they built it for them. But
and I think that'll be important, because that'll shape the format of the tools, like in the presentation layer, right? Like, because is it just raw data science, or is it more of a curated service where you can using like natural language processing just ask questions and plain text and get answers? It'd be interesting.
Well, it's time for a retirement party. One of the oldest IAM policies that I am aware of in all of AWS is being retired officially. The IAM actions for AWS billing, cost management, and account consoles under the AWS portal service prefix, and the purchase orders, view purchase orders, and purchase orders, modify purchase orders, API IAM permissions will all be deprecated and replaced with new fine-grained service-specific actions. And this launch gives AWS customers more control over access to billing, cost management, and account services. These new permissions will also provide a single set of IAM actions that govern console and programmatic access to all of the cost services. So they gave an example here where you want to give a developer access to budgets and cost explorers while denying them access to bills and or tax setting services. This allows customers to put engineers and business unit leaders in charge of cost usage optimization and control and implement decentralized cloud cost management. Now, if you're using Cloud Health or any of these other cloud cost management tools, you will have to upgrade your permissions before July 6th, as that is when they will be retired. And the new fine-grained access controls are available to you today. So you have plenty of time to make the pivot, which you won't do until July 7th when it all breaks.
It's kind of fascinating, because a lot of these announcements previously, they were just removing the ability to apply the older policies. And so it's interesting that these are actually like, they will stop working on July 6th, which isn't a huge amount of time.
I mean, I don't know if it's actually, and that's fair. I might have misread it, or, again, press releases are sort of hard. Mm-hmm. It didn't, I don't know if that means that it says it will no longer be available after July 6th. So that may be that if you already have an existing policy, you're fine. You just can't add it to a new one. That might be what that interpretation could be. Again, I'm trying to squint through the press release verbiage of what they actually mean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could also see them going the other way on this one because it's very unlikely that this is going to, take down your production workload, right? And affect your, it's going to impact your visibility and maybe your reporting, which could, if you've got a tight regulatory concerns, maybe is an issue. But
well, and I think about it from the 3D chess model of like, what predictions are they going to do for reInvent? And like, if they retire this by July 6th and they get you off of this type of access, then that opens the door for them to give you new types of billing tooling potentially at reInvent that you may want. And if this was in the way, then they have a prerequisite they don't want to have in the way. So my 3D chess thinking about like, what predictions do I want to think about for reInvent in November? This one kind of tinkles my fancy because I think there's been a lot of demand from the FinOps community in particular about, what do they want to do for finance and how do they want to improve the CUR and a lot of those things, which have been some of the oldest technology in all of the AWS cloud.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's wishful thinking, but I also feel like, the amount of screaming they must hear about the CUR and how that's done today is probably very, very substantial.
Yeah. I mean, wishful thinking, but it's also been something that's been getting louder for multiple years now. So long enough now that, if I look at it on the time scale of when did I get root shell access from when people started complaining about it, that's about an 8-year window. And I feel like, people are complaining about the billing for at least 8 years now. So I think we're right about on schedule. So we'll see. Well, we have mocked Azure. We've mocked GCP. We've mocked other clouds for their terrible security practices. And it's Amazon's turn. Sorry. Datadog Research has identified a defect in CloudTrail, or specifically a way to bypass CloudTrail logging for specific IAM API requests via undocumented APIs. This technique would allow an adversary to perform reconnaissance activities in their IAM service after gaining a foothold in an AWS account without leaving any trace of their actions in CloudTrail. This data was shared with AWS by Datadog Research and has been remediated. But interestingly enough, when you read through the article and you see the timeline, they reported this to AWS in March 10th, 2022, and did not have it fixed until October 24th, 2022. That is a long time. And the fact that Datadog didn't just go, we're going to press on this, like all like Wiz and everybody else, kudos to them. But also, like, that's a long time. And then, 90 days after October 24th, you hit it into January 17th. And that's why you're now able to disclose this publicly. So Datadog, at least if they do find a security issue in your software, does follow your disclosure requirements, which is nice. Versus Wiz, who's like, no, the press is more valuable than not pissing Amazon off or anybody else.
I mean, I think it's great when these things are found by a research firm and where they can be remediated without them being like subject to a massive exploit. This is a bad one, and I bet you just due to where it is, it was probably hard to remediate, and so without breaking a lot of other things, which would then have even bigger impacts on security, since CloudTrail is sort of crucial for detecting and doing analysis on access to your cloud environment. So we'll never know the details. I'm sure there's people that do, but it's I wonder.
I mean, I suspect, and reading through the article, and again, I'm reading between the lines just a little bit. It does sound like it was a pretty large change because again, the IAM admin, basically it was a service that ran behind the scenes to do actions, and basically you would invoke it from an IAM policy, and so it was one of these situations where you potentially weren't supposed to even have access to it altogether. And most likely they opened it for some other reason, which then if they just closed it would have broken a bunch of other things, which have been bad. And you just see it unravels very quickly. So it was definitely a miss. It's definitely something they need to not let happen again. But, it took them a while to fix it, which is why I think it took so long. Probably because it impacted lots of services.
Yeah. Yeah. You probably just peeled back one layer and found more, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And again, like Datadog still got to talk about it and still got the press and all those things. So it's good. So moving on to GCP, there's no stories because we killed CCAI. So sorry about that. Just, sometimes you just can't get excited for call centers. I don't know.
Even AI powered call centers, but
even AI ones. So moving on to Azure. Jonathan is very good at reading crystal balls. So for his 2023 prediction, he said that Azure would basically launch a ChatGPT service. This is close. They're basically saying general availability of Azure OpenAI service is now available. Azure OPN AI service is now generally available, with more business can apply access to the most advanced AI models in the world, including GPT-3.5, Codex, and DALL-E-2. Customers will also be able to access ChatGPT, a fine-tuned version of ChatGPT 3.5. Has been trained and runs inference on Azure AI infrastructure through Azure OpenAI service very, very soon. Pricing is based on your inference per 1,000 tokens or a hosting per hour, depending on what models you are using and how you are using them. So not too expensive. Still waiting for that ChatGPT pricing. So that one I'm curious about.
Yeah, I mean it is really interesting to see, ChatGPT, make the headlines. And I was reading an interesting story that was really talking about why, because I guess the AI underneath it isn't really super revolutionary, but the access model is. And I thought that was a pretty interesting sort of take on it, and not really knowing enough about, the models and the training. Like I've been part of like large data sets for image identification and certain other things. So I know a little bit, but it is sort of fascinating to me that, how these things are evolving, how certain questions are better answered by certain models, and where I thought it would be more around the data sets that powered underneath it. And really, ChatGPT being just a chatbot that's free and available for anyone to ask questions of it has really just catapulted it front and center to a lot of people. And so,
yeah, it's the best free marketing you can get when everyone's talking about it for other reasons. And also now suing it too, because there's some cases going through court about it, leveraging different public repositories for image stuff where they were stealing that, or different writing formats and methods. So yeah, I think we're in for an interesting time on some of that. It was sort of interesting, your comment about the access model, because I was listening to our first episode of the year, just seeing how it turned out, in the final edit. And I don't listen to all of our shows, but I try to listen to at least a couple of them now. And we were talking a lot about the platform story around, Oculus and Facebook being a platform company, and could they do that? And I was thinking, I didn't bring it up at the time, but I was listening back to it. I was like, the real big issue there is that, Facebook and Apple and all these people, like, they're not first movers. They're all third or fourth movers. And so there's going to be the companies who build the primitives, and then there's going to be the companies who make billions off the primitives. And we're still at the primitive stage. So we're, Google or Facebook or any of these people trying to build the beginning sketches of these things are, they're the ones who are either going to be lost, have to figure out how to monetize it, or they're going to be left behind when someone comes up with a better way to use these new technologies. And that might be the case with ChatGPT too, as well, right? Where, yeah, like you said, this is the first time there's been an access model that really made sense and it was free. But, is that the one that's going to be $1 billion and be the next big thing? Probably not. But something someone will build on top of it will be. And who's going to do that? And that's the big question.
Have you been waiting months and months to hire your new AWS, GCP, or Azure architect, only to have them be poached at the 11th hour by a startup with a juice bar? Initiatives stalled because you're having trouble hiring? Well, I have a simple solution: Foghorn Consulting. Foghorn Consulting provides top-notch cloud engineers to the world's most innovative companies and can be burning down your DevOps and cloud backlogs as soon as next week. Foghorn certified AWS, GCP, and Azure professionals are armed with infrastructure as code, and from day one will be designing performant, optimized cloud-native or hybrid environments that deliver on the promise of cloud. Their FogOps solution even provides on-demand cloud engineering to augment your existing teams. Visit www.foghornconsulting.com or send an email to cloudtalentnow@foghornconsulting.com and tell them the CloudPod sent you. Your dedicated FogOps team is with you for the long haul, and they bring their own juice.
All right. Well, let's move on to our cloud journey series. Once again, we're still talking CCOE. We'll be talking about it still for several more weeks, but we're getting to some of the meat and potatoes of your CCOE now. And one of the very first big areas that we want to talk about is diving into access management, or the dreaded IAM and IAM policies and what that means. So, Ryan, where do you want to start in access management? Such a lightning, exciting topic.
Yeah. Well, it's near and dear to my heart just because I've battled through it for so long. And I feel like it's often not the first area people look at. It's when you think about why you want to adopt cloud, which we discussed kind of in depth last week, it's really that speed, that innovation, that the ability to experiment fast. And so oftentimes it's not until you have really sort of started your journey to launch your first production workload that you really take a serious look at this, at least with fine grained, lenses where you look at the different teams and different parties that need to be involved for any real workload. And so I think it should be the first challenge that's tackled, and I usually try to approach it as such, but it is also sort of hard to do when it starts off as an experiment or someone's pet account that they just started doing things in, and you have to retrofit it in. It's complicated.
So, I mean, like my trick to IAM getting started is I just create a new Amazon account, go in, I get myself administrator rights, and I just go to the races. Like I don't know why that's a problem, and why that isn't a best practice, because I got access to everything and it solves all my problems, and I can do that with buckets. I can do that with all kinds of things. Why not just do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no real reason, as long as you are fine sharing all of that information and having people somehow gain access to your credentials and stand up a billion Bitcoin mining machines and charge it to your credit card. So it just depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Sure. So, and you think about, this access model, and you think about, kind of approaching it, like you said, there's lots of ways you can approach it. Again, IAM touches every part of the cloud. Like, is there a particular, I have a new account, I have a new CCOE project and team, I've got a new, corporate initiative to get to the cloud. Like, where do I even, how do you start? Where, are you running into zero trust access out the box, or are you kind of thinking a little bit more basics, and a little bit more, principled?
Yeah. So it's definitely, I'm very, very slow on tackling new problems, right? I like to sit and chew on it for a while and really get data about how to move forward. And so the first things I typically try to do is I look at, the existing access model for whether it's a data center or a dev environment or whatever you have, and really understanding sort of the ins and outs of what you currently have. And I think that that's super important, just because you're going to, in most cases, you're going to be leveraging something like a central IAM or identity store. You're going to be partnering with, either an IT or a corporate entity or some sort of identity source, or you're going to be managing that manually by creating users in these accounts. And knowing that up front allows you to plan for it and spec for it. And that's, that's really where you're going to get, the basis of your ideas of where you want to start allowing access into your cloud environment. Taking a look at everyone that's in your existing cloud environment and has administrator rights, and really taking a look at what permissions and APIs are they exercising, and do they really need the permissions to access everything in that account, and are your auditors going to be okay with that? That sort of question. And it oftentimes will lead to, we just need to create a whole new account for our production workload and sort of deploy into it, and leave our existing one as either a POC account or a dev account or whatever, and so it becomes a key part of your strategy to sort of understand where you're at and where you want to go.
So, I typically think access. How does that account and project structure kind of play into that from some perspectives?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's super important, right? If you think about the way you define an org policy or an access control barrier of any sort, right? You need to sort of think about, the whole software development lifecycle that's going to go on with that account. You start off with a development, and then you hand it off to a QA team, and then maybe you hand it off to a separate performance team, and then you hand it off to an operations team, maybe SRE, maybe there's a release team involved, and all of these teams, sort of just to get an application running. And then, are you really thinking about, the isolation that you need for that? Like, should that be all within one account? What controls do you have to sort of protect against accidentally overriding prod? Do you have data loss concerns that you want to sort of mitigate by not allowing all of the development teams access to your production customer data? And how you define that will define your account structure, and that account structure will be where you apply different sets of rules to different environments, where you have higher environments and lower environments, and the rules are different between the two. And maybe you have a third type, where you do integration and staging or handoffs of some sort. And all of that sort of, it really helps to define at least where you want to go up front so that you can target those with individual policies.
Yeah. And, again, you're thinking your technical teams, but you're also your supporting teams too, right? It's not just IT or your cloud team, for example. It's also customer support and implementation services, and how do they do the things that you desperately need to do to keep your systems running and up in process. Now, you might push those over time to say, like, this is an opportunity to kind of reset those expectations and say, hey, you used to have access to servers in production on the data center, but now, we're raising the bar at some level in our IAM too. And we're going to go through a different pattern. We're going to start saying, look, we're not going to allow you access to production unless it's break glass. And so that starts changing some of the conversations you need to have with those people as well. And you need to start kind of thinking about some of the tooling around some of that as well as you go through this IAM discussion. The tooling comes later, but you got to think about the foundations of that in the IAM policies of, like, are you going to use, now you have things like security tags. It didn't exist 6 months ago, 6 years ago, but it does now in the AWS cloud or in even Azure or GCP. And maybe you want to think about how that stuff gets worked out too. So I think that's another thing to think about too, is it's not that you're going to build all of it today, but you're going to definitely want to think a little bit, what's your story going to be in 6 to 12 to 18 months? And how is that going to evolve this? And can I make some good foundational choices now versus having to retrofit this a year and a half from now when it doesn't work?
And undoing access granted is hard, right? You
Yes.
have production workloads and that are dependent on permissions, and it's difficult and it's risky. And this is absolutely an opportunity to look at those things that you're doing today in your production environment that maybe you don't need to be doing in the production environment. Maybe you can change the model. I've definitely been part of a few migrations where customer support logged directly into databases to modify data to support customers. I've been in companies where product teams had the ability to run queries against very large data sets in order to strategize against feature releases and strategy and roadmap. And a lot of these things, like you in the data centers, you didn't necessarily have sort of a service and application that you could leverage for fine grained controls. It was a little bit through AD groups, but it just wasn't as powerful as you get in a cloud environment. So this is an opportunity to take advantage of those technologies and think about doing something differently. Maybe pumping a whole lot of data into a data lake, or providing sort of operational applications to manage your application so that you don't have to allow raw access to your data tier.
Yeah. And then I also think you can start thinking about, your failure isolation boundaries too. If you get hacked, what access do the users have? And can you start thinking about, can I compartmentalize people better with the granularity I have in IAM and tagging and these different things to create smaller failure isolation boundaries and create basically, that's really bad that server got, that IAM credential got compromised, but its access is so limited that we know exactly what they could have touched. And then you can go focus your security incident on those areas they could have touched. Versus right now, you get into a data center and now you're looking at, what can they get in my completely flat horizontal network? They can get to everything. Mm-hmm. And now you're doing security incident management across your entire fleet of servers versus a very specific set of, like, okay, well, if I am permission allowed to get to this server, then we know to go to that server first and do our forensics there. And then then you can see where they jumped. And then if you continue to maintain these small failure isolation boundaries with limited access, you can keep tracking that down until you figure out where they ended. Hopefully it wasn't in your crown jewels where they ended, but hopefully somewhere before that where they got blocked by or detected, and that's why you're actually even in the security incident.
Yeah. And you can protect yourself from, the risk of like a ransomware attack just by, your users are always going to be the weakest link in the security chain. And you can, put an environment together where no users have access to the data that's shipped to it. And so, like, if you, back up all your data to this immutable account that's really difficult to get into and requires, 2 people to turn a key, it's unlikely that that's going to be, compromised, at least in the same way that, the original compromise took place. And so it's a great way to mitigate a lot of those risks where it's, where you're not paying millions of dollars of bounty just to get your encryption key to unlock your data.
Yeah. Don't pay the bounty.
Yeah, never
Protect yourself before that happens.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we here at the Cloud Pod know better than probably any other person in the world, other than maybe Corey Quinn, but I think we know about it on a multi-cloud basis, and he only knows it from Amazon, is that these cloud providers are launching a ton of innovation. They're doing a ton of features, and they're constantly changing their IAM roles and policies and changes. How do you deal with that? It's a big challenge if you think about, I had access to this today, or even earlier in the day, we talked about, my account, my billing access just changed or is about to change. And so that's something I now have to deal with. How do you deal with that at speed and don't slow your business down?
I think it's key to remember that, these are centralized configurations for huge environments, and treat them as such. Like, even if you're starting off small, think about a day where you are a huge enterprise company and what that might look like. Not in the terms where you have to have all those questions answered, but realize that, this isn't going to be going and changing one config in one place at some point, right? You're going to have a process, and you want to develop a pipeline. And, the big advantage of, adopting infrastructure that's available via API is that you can start treating it like code. You can develop CI/CD pipelines for your IAM permissions. And you can even, there's technologies now where you can actually write unit tests for your permissions so that you can test if you're granting overly permissive protections or permissions or not enough, where you'd be affecting your workloads. And so you can really apply some pretty modern pipelines with testing and stuff where you can promote these and, mitigate your risk of changes there. And so really thinking about how you want to manage those and how you would introduce a change to add a new permission to a team or remove a permission that you found was too permissive, and being able to sort of track and provide the visibility along the lines is really important. And, this is, the beginning of your journey with CCOE. So it might be, things you're thinking about, not for today, but for tomorrow. But it's important to think about, because I think it's very often glanced over, and it becomes, like I said, very difficult to remove permissions once you've granted them, especially if you haven't put in the monitoring where you can track which permissions are being used when and by who.
Agreed. So I think we just talked a lot about IAM in particular, and then we didn't talk about permissions.
Mm-hmm.
So where are they in IAM?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because if you think about the permissions themselves, they're the least important part of your IAM journey. Permissions will change depending on what new service or new widget they've released, and whether it's read access or that. You will always have to evaluate those permissions on a continual basis. It's even more a reason why you want to have a sophisticated pipeline to manage this. And so what permissions a certain user gets is not an answer you can really develop centrally. You want to be able to really analyze who needs what and have a structure and a policy and a governance model that guides you to define those. And it's going to be very specific to your business and very specific to your workload. And, it's a difficult challenge that's going to have to be faced by every center of excellence, but it's also there's no master list of these permissions are okay to have. You can't just assume the Amazon read-only policy is okay and enough protection. You have to look at the individual permissions, what they do, and then in many times map that on layers of permissions that you can sort of build up to see if you've got an adequate protection for those. So it's a tricky challenge.
Yeah. Some of those managed policies are actually very dangerous. And when you really start to understand IAM policies, what they're doing, and then you go look at what Amazon gave you, they're giving you a set of controls that is basically for a company that has some security, but nothing too sophisticated or too complicated. And I would not want to use those permissions for protecting most important company secrets. They're too broad. There's things that it's enabled by default that maybe you don't want enabled by default, or you want it as a different role even, or a different permission through the process. So they're great to get started. They're great for your innovation space or where you're doing experimentation, because it gets you started quickly. But when you go to production, managed roles may not be the best thing. Plus, they can change at any time. So Amazon adds new capabilities, and maybe that new capability isn't something your security team wants to use, but oh wait, we already gave permission to all the users because we're using managed rule. You probably want more control than that managed policy will give you. And so at least at minimum, review what's in the managed policy and then copy it into your own policy. And remember when, put some details in the notes of like, I copied it from this policy on this date. So you have the details so you can go track it back later. Or, use Terraform or whatever other thing you do to manage your infrastructure as code.
I mean, there's Twitter bots now. You can subscribe to Twitter bots. They'll tell you when the managed policy changes. It's awesome.
There are quite a few of those out there.
Yeah.
I think we talked about a good portion of our IAM topic here. Did I miss anything you want to bring up, Ryan?
No, I mean, I think, in summary, it's all about really a lot of thought up front. IAM is one of the hardest challenges that Center of Excellence will face. And so really looking at, who's going to need access to your cloud workloads and what access they're going to need, and how that's going to be managed, not just today, but over its lifetime is really key. Yeah. Group that together with defining your failure and isolation boundaries and your data protection boundaries, and you've got yourself a pretty decent IAM strategy.
Can you give some examples of IAM strategy gone wrong and what some of the repercussions might be, and kind of the warning message of like, here what happens if you don't do it quite right? Do you have any good examples?
Oh yeah, many examples. That I referenced the read-only policy earlier, and that's definitely a lesson learned. You grant someone read-only access, and you sort of think that that's pretty good, right? I want to give them the ability to look at the account, but not make any changes. And then realizing that you've granted the S3 get object permission after the fact, and someone later on the line came along, decided to store credentials in an S3 file, and they thought it was perfectly safe because they had encrypted them. And it was one of those things where, you find that, your credentials have been, it's not credentials for Amazon, but credentials somewhere in the application have been leaked and are being used by, everyone in the company, and it's not really secure, and you can no longer remove access to that. And so that was one lesson that I learned the hard way. I've been part of many migrations where the current support model did require a lot of direct access to applications, where that stopped the entire migration process because it was too expensive to apply a new policy to your cloud workload, and taking the existing one into the cloud seemed too risky to the business because it's, you're already moving your data out of your high walled garden and your data center and moving into the cloud, and it shut things down. So there are definitely some gotchas in there where it can be a problem. I've also locked myself out of accounts. I can't say how many times through playing with automation and doing that kind of stuff. So there's those kind of gotchas as well. So.
Oh, I back in my Windows SME days, which I know you like to make fun of me for, I had to do a lot of work with group policies and enforcing things through group policies. And I always had a little test domain that I would do those tests in first, because the number of times that I completely borked my access to the entire domain was not zero. And I think IAM is a very similar thing. Like, with great power comes great responsibility, and do be careful, because you're right. You can eliminate your ability to do a lot of things. There's actually some really great exploits. People talk about, like, okay, you get access to the Amazon account, and then you don't disable CloudTrail, because disabling CloudTrail would be a red flag, but you change the encryption key to an encryption key that's in your other account, and then all of a sudden now they can't decrypt their own data in CloudTrail, right? And like, there's all these things that you can enable with these different patterns if you think about it. And there's some really great write-ups of like, here's how I would completely own someone's Amazon account. And they walk you through some of these strategies, and they're all based on really bad IAM permission boundaries, typically, or using managed policies from Google, from AWS or from Google. So do take it seriously. Don't get so locked up then that you don't move forward in your strategy, but keep this in mind and think about it for at least more than 5 minutes.
Yes. Yeah.
So next week we're going to talk about the big cloud elephant in the room, which is always security. and I'm giving all my data to a cloud provider. How do I secure it? What am I worried about? What are the things that I need to know? And how do I make my pesky CISO happy with our cloud strategy and journey, which is a key part of our CCOE. Again, part of your CCOE is a security person, and there's a key reason for that. And we'll talk about that all next week. And that is it for another fantastic week in the cloud. Thank you, Ryan, for joining me. We did that a little more interview style than normally, but yeah, you're the expert and I am. I am not. So
yeah, I don't know.
All right.
2 people. What are we going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do? See you next week.
All right. Bye, everybody.
And that is the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Foghorn Consulting. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and tweet us your feedback at #TheCloudPod. Or join our Slack channel, go to our website, thecloudpod.net for sign-up instructions.